Hey everybody, thought I'd do another video about Savage Kingdoms and D&D 5th edition and whether I should convert SK to 5e. So, alright, get ready, buckle up, because this is going to be a weird, rough ride. Okay, probably not. Alright, so I never edit these things, I just kind of whatever. So I thought what I would try to do, today's subject matter is, as I just said, is talking about converting. I hate to say converting. It sounds like you're abandoning your original rule system in order to embrace another one. That is not true. Uh, Giving an alternative game system to the core SK system. In other words, using D&D 5th edition, or just 5e as we should call it, because if I do go this route, and I'm actually working on the rules right now, I will be using the OSR version, where you can't use the Dungeons and Dragons name. You can't use certain creature names like Beholder and Owlbear and stuff like that, which is totally fine because I don't want to use any of that stuff anyway. I have my own setting as a lot more. It's pretty detailed. And I don't really need that kind of other stuff that kind of goes with it. So the main purpose for converting, I'm using the term again. I'm just going to use the term converting. Just easier. Converting true Savage Kingdoms to 5e is because of marketability. To be quite honest, 5e is quite popular and well deserved. It's actually quite a good system overall. Talking about this right here. D&D 5th edition Player's Handbook has seen quite a lot of wear and tear. I run games professionally for, particularly for kids, after school and clubs and on Saturdays. And this thing gets and they've been very popular. I've been very blessed to be able to do that. So this thing gets a lot of wear and tear. The other game system I'm talking about, my personal baby of my design, is Savage Kingdoms core rulebook. This is third edition, as we're talking about. That's the current edition. Core rulebook's been out about a year, actually a little over a year, almost a year and a half actually, and year and a quarter. And then this is the new book that just came out, the Savage East and third edition, which expands on the eastern part of the world, Hassan and Manju and blah blah blah. And I know I've mentioned all that stuff before. Introducing new callings or not new callings. Well, yeah, a few new callings, new talents, new weaknesses, new uses for skills, new spells, new sects and orders, blah blah blah. Elite affiliations. All right. So even though this game system I really like, it's very small in the grand scheme of things. D&D 5th edition being the king, Pathfinder kind of being a fairly distant second now, actually. And then you got stuff way under that, like, that's not to say they're not great, they're awesome. I'm just saying as far as commonality, as far as popularity. Stuff like Dungeon Crawl Classics and Savage Worlds and stuff like that. Great systems as well, but and they're even much larger than mine, but compared to D&D 5th edition and even Pathfinder, they're actually fairly small. Warhammer's another one. And there's a bunch of other Shadowrun, stuff like that. So, as much as I'm proud of SK, I'm looking at maybe kind of bringing the setting of Savage Kingdoms into another system, which in my system of choice would be 5e, because I do run it for kids. Now it's not. It's a pretty easy to run system. They did a really good job of making it accessible. You can learn to DM and just well, the basics. If you've never Dungeon Master before, I mean, it would take you a week really to kind of read everything and kind of figure out what's going on. If you've been around D&D and played some, and you know the rules pretty well, you could probably DM in like 48 hours of preparation, or 72 hours, 24 hours. Depends on how, whole bunch of stuff. How smart you are, how good you are preparing, how comfortable you are with medieval fantasy, storytelling, all that stuff. So they did a good job making it very simple. SK3, I'm pretty proud to say that it's simpler than the original editions, which wasn't that difficult, but there were some encumbering things, as some of you will agree. SK3's design was one of the main design goals I had. I mean, the main number one design goal was to kind of find some of that stuff and pare it down, which is why have armor piercing instead of like a damage bonus for pretty much all weapons, or almost all weapons. Just like simple stuff like that. You see the math scaled down. So instead of the 1 to 10 system for attributes, we now have a -5 to +5, and actually it can even go up to +6 or even occasionally +7 for player characters. Certain other creatures can be much higher. But in general, the numbers have been pared down by 5, and actually in some ways a little bit more, but in generally speaking. And then using a 0 base makes it easier as well. So an average is +0 instead of like it used to be 5, right? Doesn't seem that big of a deal, but it is the math. And I know for me running the game out of my, it's far more easier. And I noticed I took a cue too from a lot of the younger players when I played D&D. They're much more into they intuit numbers better when it's a base 0 system. They know that 0 is average, or at least just kind of whatever. They don't necessarily know it means average sometimes. But they know that +2 is better than 0, right? They know that even +1 is better than 0. They know that -2 is worse, or -4 is horrible. So it's kind of taking a cue from them as well when I did SK3 to make it more simplistic. So all that's to say that SK Savage Kingdoms is probably a little harder to run as your first gig as a game master. There's a few things I think that actually are easier, but I think overall it's a little more difficult than 5th edition. So converting, again, I'm using the term converting, converting the Savage Kingdom setting to 5e would be to make it possibly more simple, at least a little bit, 20% more simple, I would say, just to throw a number out there, and also to be more accessible because 5th edition is super popular. So not only does that help me professionally a little bit more, maybe I can make a little bit more money. I don't make tons of money on this, honestly. My main job is actually as an actor, which is kind of weird. Most people's probably secondary jobs. So between the two, I'm able to kind of eke out a living and as a tour guide. But it would be nice to maybe earn a little bit more from doing this game design, game mastery sort of stuff, because I do put a lot of time into it. So to have the setting available in another rule set might be really cool. All right, so those of you who don't know me personally may not realize that I do have, the reason I'm looking down is I'm looking for the playtest rules. So it looks like I have almost 90 pages, like 88, 89 pages of playtest material, of converted material from Savage King, True SK to 5e, my 5e version. So a couple things that'll be different really quick. I know I did a video about, I think it's been probably 3 years now, 3 or 4 years ago, where I talked about my house rules for D&D 5e. About 90% of those house rules are now in the SK version of 5e. So that was really kind of a way of saying, because I pretty much, whenever I run D&D, I usually pretty much always use my own setting. I did run Death House once, which is the starting part of Curse of Strahd. So I kind of left that in Ravenloft because it's kind of its own little thing. But otherwise, when I run games for kids and camps, I almost not always, but almost always use my own setting just because I know the lore so well without even really having to look it up. And it makes it so much more immersive for the players if I can just immediately know what the NPC would be saying here, what is in those woods or across the mountains there. What is the religious, what's the funerary rites of this place? I don't have to look up all that stuff. I still occasionally do an SK, but for the most part, 95% of the times I don't have to look it up because it's all in my head. So, so I do use my own setting already for 5e anyway. So the rules, however, in order to publish 5e and make it kind of an official thing, I don't know why I did this, I would have to have rules changes or rules additions in order to make this setting resonate, as it were. If I were to just flat out here's the SK setting and it's completely the same 5e rules that exist, the core 5e rules, wouldn't really be the SK setting. It'd be about 70% of it, 65% of it, because you would lose certain feels and certain aspects and even certain what am I saying? Some of the thematic stuff would be missing. That could be supported with some really interesting game mechanics. So beyond just mere fluff and flavor, there are some hard mechanics that would be kind of introduced. First of all, I would get rid of alignment. Alignment would be used. I would use the Code of Honor. I am using the Code of Honor system that's from Core SK, which is more of a tribal morality, more of a gray morality, as it were. Callings would be, I'm embracing the class system because callings in true SK are pretty close. They're what I would call 3/4 of the way to being a class. Not quite as restrictive, and that was on purpose. But for the most part, it's, you could call a calling a class comfortably. You're a profession or something. So I'll be embracing the class system. Elite affiliations from the SK world work perfect as subclasses for 5e. So I've already got a lot of those written. Those have been kind of fun. I like, honestly, those have been kind of fun seeing how I can make the Order of the Raven from SK rules and change it into a druid subclass that's called the Circle of the Raven. Just use an example. Or seeing how the Company of the Black Lions can be made into a fighter subclass, or converting, the hardest thing has been converting paladin oaths, because any I don't really have paladins per se. They're not really called that in SK, but I do have holy warriors. I mean, the closest culture that kind of produces that would be Eridorn, and to some degree Tarnia. But they don't really use the term paladin. I kind of did that on purpose because I felt like that term was overused from D&D, which is why I don't have orcs. They're actually hobgoblins. But as much as I like orcs, actually. So this has been kind of a little bit difficult converting knightly orders or paladin-like orders to oaths, and trying to, because now the idea is that paladins get their power from making this great oath, which is kind of a little weird to wrap my head around, but now I'm kind of getting it. I kind of think it's cool, and you can still use orders. Like, I still have a couple of orders that are not. That's not a paladin subclass. Is not an oath of. It's actually, you're a member of this order that might have several oaths involved. So the idea being that your training in this order is where you're getting your paladin powers, and not necessarily an oath to any kind of greater cause necessarily. So that's all doable. The same with wizard subclasses. The original wizard subclasses in D&D 5e were specialists, right? The 8 specialties of magic, or schools of magic. And then as the new books came out in 5e, a few different concepts came out. That not all wizard subclass was a specialty of magic. There was now, like, gosh, I can't remember of any right off the bat. But anyway, trust me, there are some, and you probably know this already. So I'm doing that with SK as well. I have like a rune mages. This is where I can take my rune magic talent from true SK and turn it into an actual class or subclass of wizard. What's another wizard? The Disciples of Xanthala have become the subclass because that's an elite order in true SK. And there's some the Blighter. The Blighter talent is really a lot of fun. A lot of people like it, but I don't really see it that much. They're always like, "Oh, this is really cool," and no one ever plays one, because I think once you realize what's happening when you're blighting the land, it's kind of so that is actually a subclass now. I didn't do that with the druid because it didn't make sense, and there was already one out there, I think, that was kind of known. I might end up doing a sort of a druidic version of one, but yeah, not to get too much off subject. So what's a couple other subclasses really quick before I close this segment up? The Shadow Hand, the big thieves organization based in Larenthia, and that kind of spreads out from there. That would be a rogue subclass, right? So your choices would be Thief, Assassin, Arcane Trickster, whatever those other new ones are, and also Shadowhander. So I know it seems kind of weird you're choosing to be a Shadowhander, which is kind of being like a thief, but it's its own thing, right? It gives you its own little abilities and powers, which is kind of cool. Connects you to the setting as well a little bit more. What's another good example? Oh yeah, the various cults that I have, because as you know, in SK, I like cults. You see a lot of these cults, or at least hear about them in the lore. Draconic cults, cults of Gorgon, Gorgonic cults, and stuff like that. So most of the cults fit really well in Warlock subclass. Those have been one of my favorite things to kind of convert, because they just kind of make sense. You join this cult, you make this oath, or you make this pact with this weird thing that you probably don't even know about, or you think you do and you really don't, and that's where you get tricked. This is very Conan as well. Some of the Conan stories is really cool, and I like warlocks being a little darker and alien. Anyway, this whole celestial patron warlock thing is kind of weird, but also cool. I will admit. Speaking of which, domains for clerics have been cool. So coming up with, because there's a few that are missing that are very SK based, like I have my own death domain, but I might use the one from the DMG. I don't know. It's pretty close. What else do I have that's different? Mystery from the goddess Omega, mystery domain. Seduction, did I call it, or charm? I don't know. Anyway, it's one for Lucia, the goddess Lucia, from the Laurentian people, and there were one or two others. New domains to come up with, which is really kind of cool. A lot of fun. Some more sorcerer bloodlines that I came up with that kind of tie into the SK setting itself, such as the netherworldly bloodline, or the demonic bloodline. There's a genie bloodline, or whatever it's called, and I think it's called sorceress bloodline, right? Sorceress, yeah. Sorceress ancestry. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. They get that at first level, right? Because you're kind of born with that, right? The idea in D&D, sorcerers it's internal magic, and that's why it's charisma based. And so therefore you're kind of born with it, which is why you get it at first level. Speaking of first level, that kind of triggered a memory. So speaking of first level or before first level, backgrounds, right? What were you before a first level adventurer? So I have new backgrounds as well for SK 5E. I think there's like 12 or 13 new ones. There's like slave, gladiator, farmer. Because I know you have folk hero, but this is just allow you, like, I wasn't even a hero, just a good old farmer. But it gives me these benefits because I was like connected to the earth, and I worked well with animals, and I kind of know crops and stuff like that. What's another? Gladiator was one. Gypsy is one. Gypsy's kind of a cool little cultural subcultural thing in SK, particularly in Malovia and Esmondos. So Gypsy, what else? Anyway, there's several more backgrounds that I think will allow a Squire. Squire is one that allow people to connect a little bit more with the setting, and also kind of set up your actual first level class, whatever it is. What else would be converting? Let's see, we talked about classes, alignment, subclasses. Races. Duh. Probably should have started with that one almost. So the SK specific races, the unique SK races have already been converted. I've already done all the rules for them. I think there's a little more description I have to write out. And I'll probably have to tweak a few things as well. I've noticed a couple things are not really balanced. That's a big thing. As well it should be, maybe not to a huge degree as a lot of people are fascinated with, but yeah, so there's some balance issues I need to kind of figure out. But anyway, the Chunari have been converted, both types of Chunari, the Amanjian Chunaris, the Mezcan Chunari, the Rathkiri, the very strange alien Arctic humanoid race has been converted. I think they came out really well. All three casts of Sleer have been converted to 5e. The Jan, which are kind of the genie-like humanoids, have been converted. The Tinku have been converted. I know there's a Kinku race from Volo's Guide to Monsters already in D&D 5th edition. People are free to use that, but if you want to use the official, I guess, keep doing that. Keep doing air quotes. Then use the Tinku. What's the other ones? Dwargar. Dwargar are pretty similar to dwarves in the Player's Handbook. I think I'm actually just using dwarf stuff right now. I think it even says it in the rules. But I might tweak it and kind of make my own entry called Dwargar. Just like the Shi are pretty much as 5th edition elves. You can use wood elves equal wild Shi, dark elves equal dark elves, or drow, but you wouldn't call them drow. That's actually just a Forgotten Realms term. And the Alunashi become high elves, or vice versa. So you wouldn't be too far off there. And what else? So half elves are they would be a thing. I know in standard SK You might hear the term half elf thrown around from an NPC occasionally, but usually they're usually called she blooded or elf blooded, but it's the same thing. It's fine. Half orcs are kind of a weird thing because they kind of exist, but they wouldn't be called that per se. So in other words, the closest thing to orcs in SK, true SK, are hobgoblins, which are big, greater goblins. They're almost like they're urukai from Middle Earth, from Lord of the Rings. So even though they're not called orcs, you could still use the half orc template and just call it half hobgoblin, which is, I know, kind of awkward. I did kind of in the lore of SK, I did sort of hide some little cheat code in there that one of the old names in Goblin tongue, in the Goblin speech, Hobgoblin is Erk, I think. So the word orc is actually in the lore. So if you called somebody, you could, in other words, you could use the term orc. Even though they technically don't exist in SK. Or you're free to just say a new kind of sub race of hobgoblins suddenly come into the world and they're known as orcs. So totally fine. In any case, the half orc option is there either to be half hobgoblin, half orc, whatever you want to call it, but the stat block is pretty much the same. Let's see what else would be different. So halflings do not exist in the SK setting. Kind of breaks my heart a little bit because I actually I used to not like hobbits when I was younger. But I've come to respect them more as I've gotten older and continue to read Lord of the Rings. I used to read it once every year. I've been slack over the last 2 or 3 years, but and realized that beyond the fact that they were a literary vehicle to get lazy people that like to live in Middle England and to go off on an adventure and see the greater world, because that's really the analogy that it represents. Uh, I think that's really cool. And the fact that halflings do, even though they're kind of looked at as sort of underpowered and sort of a game mechanical fantasy game sense, they have, as I read the novels more and more, they do have their own sort of powers, right? They're less corruptible. I think we all kind of know that, which is why Frodo handled the ring quite well, and Sam even better. But also being small, and I know a lot of realists will say, and it's true, like halfling couldn't swing a long sword really. I mean, it would be a two-handed sword; it would just take so much, which is why they use dagger and short swords most of the time. That's fine. Um, but if they're really as small as described in the books, they probably would not really be that effective. However, they would be very useful in stealth, right, and spying and stuff like that. So I think that totally works. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. They don't exist in true SK, but if you feel free to put them in there, you'll have to kind of come up with your own lore of why they're there. So gnomes are not in the SK setting, especially. I never have really liked gnomes that much. I feel like they were too close to halflings, but also kind of wanted to be at dwarves in the same way. Why am I doing this? And maybe that was the idea from the original designers, like, hey, we can kind of bridge between halflings and dwarves, and that's cool. And I don't know, gnomes. I kind of like the mythological lore of gnomes than the way they're kind of portrayed in D&D. So I don't really have them. Feel free to put them in there if you want, but they don't really fit in the setting at all. Probably even less so than halflings or hobbits. Depending on what you want to call it. So, what other races would not make the cut? Dragonborn do not exist in the SK setting. They are, and that's mostly when I run the kids' games for 5e. Dragonborn are quite popular, as you can imagine. They got a breath weapon. They're like dragon humanoids. They're cool. They got scales. They can be cool and kind of edgy. But I'm a huge dragon lover. You can probably see the dragon right there. Yeah, right at the tip of my finger, force perspective. And I have other dragons all around. I was born in the year of the dragon. Always like dragons, just as a symbol of not only Western dragons but Eastern dragons as well. Particularly Western dragons, but I like the mystical Eastern dragons as well. Um, I love medieval fantasy, and dragons are cool. But I like dragons in a very respectful sense, which means I don't like them to be demystified that much. And Dragonborn to me demystify dragons, and I think some other people have mentioned this as well. So that's why I don't have Dragonborn in true SK. Again, feel free to use them. I'm not quite sure how they would fit. There is a talent in True SK called Dragon Kindred, and generally it's not that you're necessarily have dragon blood in you, although some ancestries would claim that. Some houses, some families might claim that if they have dragon kindred. It's mostly like your people, your family, your tribe have always been very close to dragons, some kind of relationship to them, whether it's to worship them, whether it was to serve them, or both. Um, and so if you go that route, then maybe you could connect why there's Dragonborn in the world if you choose to use Dragonborn in SK5e. But they're not going to be supported as an official because, again, I just feel like it demystifies them. And I think they're a little too close to lizard folk, honestly. And I like lizard folk. I think they're really cool. And as a side note, that's kind of a general problem I've had through the years with D&D. As much as I love Dungeons and Dragons overall, obviously it brought me into this hobby. It even helped kickstart an acting career. That's honestly kind of where I started. I did, I guess before I played D&D, I did a couple theatrical little things in school. They were just like elementary, it was like whatever, nothing serious. But D&D 5th edition allowed me to start doing accents, and that's sort of thing. And then, but beyond that, that's like the obvious thing. Oh, you learn to do accents, whatever. But in acting, accents is like 4-5% of it. It's mostly about through lines and storytelling and character motivations, blah blah blah, all that stuff. But game mastering and storytelling has taught me of that as well. Which and then once you couple it with learning to do dialects and stuff, then you're on your way to half decent acting career if you do the work, go out there and audition and blah blah blah. That's a whole different video. But anyway, I do want to thank D&D for allowing me to make that part of my life and part of my profession. And that's how I met my wife as well. She's an actress as well. But anyway, again, another subject. All that's to say that as much as I love D&D and what it's done for me, one thing annoying about it is that there was almost too many things. There was almost too many creatures. And I'm one of those game designers and world builders that likes to have different names for creatures. So I feel like for example, orcs and hobgoblins. I'll just use that example in D&D. Too close to me, so I almost felt like, and I do it in True SK. Why not just orcs? Why not in one part of the world they're called hobgoblins? Why do they have to be two different creatures? I mean, they're not that different. And I understand from a product design, marketing standpoint, you want to put more creatures out there to sell or whatever. But honestly, as a storyteller and a game master, it bogs things down. There's a thing we experience in the modern world almost every day, and it's called decision paralysis. And that's kind of part of it. When you have a roster of 1,500 creatures to choose from, then it gets muddled and confusing, and it becomes harder to choose because there are too many. So why not just simplify it, make it 500? Why not make it 200, 250, whatever? It makes the world a little richer too, and you can get more and a little more believable. It's like we traveled 30 miles and I encountered orcs, and then 30 miles later there were hobgoblins. It's like, and yes, you can easily come up with a reason. The orcs and hobgoblins are territory at war, but it's like, why not? Why weren't they just the same? Why can't they just be called the same thing? And maybe they're just one was an offshoot from the other or whatever. So. That's about races. Just concluding about player character races and what would be available. All right, so we're at 28 minutes. See if I can wrap this up pretty quickly. What else do I need to talk about? So we talked about alignments, callings / classes, races. Oh yeah, so there'll be there's new feats. A lot of these are from adapted from talents that I have in SK, and some of those subject matter, some of those themes aren't quite in D&D. Like there's a few things, there's a couple things that are close, but they're not quite. So I've kind of ported them over and made them feats. Tanked them up a little bit because feats are a bit chunkier in 5th edition, right? They represent, and if you ever played 3rd edition or 3.5, you know that feats are nice, but you got them more often. So you get them less so and less often with 5e. So therefore they're a little chunkier. So I think they've often been said that there are about 2 to 3 feats in one. If you're based on 3rd edition, 2.5 feats. I think a lot of people would say. So some of these talents have been brought over to represent feats. A few talents have actually been worked into subclasses too, as well as like bloodlines and stuff, particularly with the sorcerer bloodline. And there's also bloodline feats. You don't have to be a sorcerer. You can be demon blood without being a sorcerer, at least as currently written. Trollborn, for example, you could be as well. What else should I go over really quick? Equipment. There'll be new equipment. So I'll have bucklers, medium shield. +2 shield is what's shield that gives you a +2 armor class bonus, and D&D 5e is the default. So we'll have bucklers, which give you a +1 AC bonus, and large or tower shields, that give you a +3 bonus. But you have disadvantage on stealth and I think acrobatics if you carry a large shield. And you have to be proficient in heavy armor too, or else you get the other penalties involved with using armor that you're not proficient with. A few new weapons, particularly some of the specific racial weapon, like some of the Sleer weaponry, the Chinari weaponry, Rathkiri weaponry, stuff like that will be adapted. I think I have most of that already designed. And I introduced a few more weapon traits as well, like D&D standard 5e already has finesse and thrown qualities, or what I think they're called qualities. I keep calling them characteristics. I think that's what I call them in SK, true SK. But I've added a few other things like weapons can grapple. I think knockdown was one of them. I'm not quite sure. Right off, I don't have the playtest rules pulled out right now, but just expect some new things in there. Oh yeah, speaking of which, so another thing that's bugged me about D&E, it still bugs me, is the gold-based system. Oh man, I don't know why it bugs me so badly. I run games for kids all the time, so for them, I didn't even bother converting. They're so used to playing video games, or gold pieces are kind of like the thing anyway. So I just kind of kept it. When you're 10, 11, 12, even 13, 14 years old, you don't really care. You're not really thinking about real economy and stuff like that. I do have a 15 and 16-year-old player though, and they're starting to they're kind of on my side. They're like, this is so weird. It would be 10,000 gold pieces in one location, or 100,000. It's like, how much gold is there? In the real world, there's only enough gold to fill the Taj Mahal, right? So in the D&D, and I know it's a fantasy setting, so you can easily say on this planet, on Faerun or on Orth or whatever, there's enough gold to fill 20 Taj Mahals or 100. So that's fine. But if you want to ground it, like I let SK again is kind of a grounded, true SK is kind of a somewhat grounded setting. I know there's 2 moons and there's magic and dragons, blah, blah, blah. We all understand that. But grounded in the sense of medieval fantasy. So what I'm getting at is that it will still be a silver-based economy. So it's a pretty simple fix. So anything in the player's handbook that says GP, just that's SP, silver pieces. Anything that says SP is just imagine that it's CP, copper pieces. So just reduce it all by 1 step. Simple, super simple. You can keep platinum pieces if you want. They do exist in the true SK setting, mostly in the East and like ancient empires. And even Electrum kind of exists. In fact, I think someone in a true SK game actually found some Electrum pieces a couple of sessions ago. We're like the first time ever from some old decadent, decaying empires. Technically, not even true currency anymore, so it would just be coins off the sheer value of the Electrum. So yeah, you could still use all that stuff as well. Gold spells, really quick spells. Yeah, there'll be new spells. I've already written about, I don't know, it's about 10 or 12. There's not that many so far, but I'll probably end up with 15 or 20 if I even decide to do this thing. I want to let you guys leave comments down below and then kind of, yeah, let me know what you think, whether I should do this. I've had advice on both sides. I think it's mostly been towards the do it for money thing, but then do it for creative storytelling reasons, not so much, because the big problem is with, and I'll kind of end with this. So, what was I talking about? Spells. Yeah, there'll be some new spells. Some of them converted from SK that I think that are really kind of cool and thematic. So to end this video, though, on the philosophy of whether to do this or not. So converting Savage Kingdom setting to D&D 5th edition, what's the big deal, right? So like I just said, monetarily, even though I won't make that much money, but it gives me a little bit more. And honestly, it's just to kind of I want to get more people kind of aware of the setting. I think it's a pretty cool setting. It's not anything super special, but it's really detailed, and I feel like people connect with it reasonably well. But on the storytelling reason why, I think some people have advised maybe not to do it, and I've been kind of going along with that. That's why I haven't quite pulled the trigger entirely on SK5e, is because it does kind of muddle the system, and your once original system now has or setting now has two systems, and that's a double-edged sword. You got two systems. It's more marketable. People are more used to 5e. They can get into it. And then a couple of people, my friends, have said, well, it's kind of the gateway drug, right? They do the 5e version. And they're like, hey, there's another version of it. Might even be cooler. So maybe they try True SK out. So there's that. There's the yin and yang, give and take, and the fact that converting a setting to another system, though it's fun as a designer to some degree, like kind of like doing some new game mechanics and stuff like that. Speaking of new game mechanics, there'll be alchemy and herbalism will be a bigger thing. So a lot of those cool magical herbs and alchemical things you could make in SK or have been converted to 5e as well. I've written most of probably 80% of them already. Another kind of cool, unique thing that I had was bardic songs and tales that were, some of them were almost kind of semi-magical if you perform them, and they gave you certain effects. I'm going to port some of those over because I think that's really cool. I haven't really seen anybody do those. And yeah, so I'll just kind of leave it at that. So that there, you see my quandary, right? I think from a game designer, it's fun to kind of keep stuff going. On the other hand, I'm kind of leery because it's 5e, and some of the profits have to go to wizards, I think, or DMs, or whatever it is. I need to look more into it, and that's fine. As it well should be, but it's stuff to all consider. So thanks for watching this video. If you've hung out this long, and let me know what you think about what I should do. Should I convert True SK to 5e or not? And Happy New Year, and I'll talk to you guys again soon.